On Monday, February 13th, 2017, at around 1:30 p.m., two best friends, Liberty German and Abigail Williams, went for a hike on the Monon High Bridge Trail in Delphi, Indiana. Shortly after 2 p.m., a man approached the girls. He then ordered them down the hill to their eventual death. Their bodies were found by searchers the following day on Tuesday, February 14th, at around noon, on a stretch of private property just 50 feet from Deer Creek and within a half a mile from the bridge. The identity of the suspect, now known as Bridge Guy, remains unknown. Police have revealed very little information outside of a short snippet from a video recorded by Liberty German of Bridge Guy approaching the girls, walking the Monon High Bridge, and a voice clip taken from the same video where the suspect is heard saying, "Guys, down the hill." This suspect or suspects must be apprehended. One of the best ways to solve this case is to raise awareness through public discussion. There is hope the suspect's identity will be revealed and law enforcement will have their day in bringing justice to the families. If you know this suspect, please contact law enforcement immediately by the telephone number or email address provided in the description of this episode. Never rationalize a tip as not being related. Someone out there knows this man, and that person could be you. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the JS podcast. And this is episode 4, I believe. And, for this week's episode, and I'm assuming for consecutive, subsequent episodes down the line for the foreseeable future, I will be focusing on the Delphi Murders case. The first time I heard about the Delphi Murders case was, I believe, shortly after it happened. I can't in particular remember the exact time, but I'm thinking it definitely was back in 2017, on the same year that the murders had happened. And at that point, I remember reading the news post about it, and I just thought that it was a very eerie case because at that point we had that still image of the main suspect, Bridge Guy. But at that particular point, I just sort of thought it was a really interesting and eerie case. The story was definitely something out of a horror movie, but I decided to leave it right there. Back in 2017, I wasn't really doing podcasts, and I definitely wasn't as interested in, cold cases as I am right now. Actually, back in 2017, when I first found out about this case, I remember thinking to myself this exact thought, that the Bridge Guy was probably a suspect, but I didn't know that much about the case, and I thought maybe it was the Bridge Guy, maybe it wasn't the Bridge Guy, maybe it's just some random person captured on the camera. Pretty much, I didn't even knew the girls' names back then. I think it was just a post that I read somewhere, that described the whole story without really getting into the actual victims too much. And I think I just left the case for a good few years, and recently I've been very interested in this case, and it's very fascinating that we still don't have a solve in this case, even though we can see the suspected killer walk for around a second, and we can also hear him say a total of 4 words, guys, down the hill. But actually, given all of this information, and we also have multiple victim sightings as well, we still have no idea who killed Liberty German and Abigail Williams on February 13th in 2017. In my opinion, if this case never gets solved, I think it will never be completely forgotten, and it will always generate, some sort of interest online, and and will always have buzz around it, especially when new information is released. And there's a lot of information that could be released here that we don't have. That's because law enforcement that are investigating this case, they do not want to release every single piece of information, which is understandable. I will not get into the rationale of that, but I will say that I do think the police should release more information at this point than they have so far. During my investigation of the Delphi murders, I would definitely be willing to schedule a call or at least go back and forth by messages or via email with someone willing to share information regarding this case, or with anyone who has researched this case in depth and could provide me with their viewpoints that could potentially give me some really good insights into the case. I would also like to mention that on the Solvable Mysteries podcast, a different podcast that I may host on, I've already been a part of a 3-episode series on the Delphi murders, but I feel like the general concept of, the Solvable Mysteries podcast is to have a more casual conversation, while I really want to do a bigger and more formal investigation into the Delphi murders. As I started to look into this case more and more, I actually realized that the information provided on Solvable Mysteries podcast is of a casual manner, and it really doesn't serve any purpose besides entertainment. I would want to do a thorough investigation this time because I really do feel really sorry and bad for the families and everyone close to the girls, and I really do hope that justice will be served to whomever is responsible for, the girls' murders. My intentions by doing, these series of episodes on the Delphi murders is to provide the listener with my own findings and the viewpoints on this case, and so I intend to solely focus on the Delphi murders for the foreseeable future, and will be doing multiple episodes on this case. By talking about this particular mystery on this podcast, I can quench my own interest in this cold case and also raise a little bit of additional awareness for the murders of the 2 girls. These reasons make it more than worth it to do this podcast, in my opinion. So this brings us to episode number 1 of the Delphi Murders case series, and the first episode of the Delphi Murders on this podcast will be focused on providing a detailed introduction into the case itself, and that will include the people involved in this case, the timeline of events up until the girls are reported missing to police, and my general viewpoints in regards to the things I'm going to be talking about. I believe that, by doing this, I can build a strong foundation on this case, and I believe it's necessary to have that strong foundation here if we are to explore the various other details of this case in depth over, the series of episodes to follow. There's a lot of information to unpack here, so in future episodes I will address certain aspects of the timeline and the people discussed on this episode. And lastly, before we jump to the nitty-gritty side of things, I would like to mention that I do realize that many people have already covered this case, and most of the listeners of this episode may already be aware of the details I'm about to discuss. Bear with me, guys. This is just the first episode regarding this case, and I want to cover this case to the best of my ability, starting from the very beginning. Before I jump to the timeline, I want to discuss the people involved in this case, and especially the 2 victims, Liberty German and Abigail Williams, who died on February 13th in 2017. Starting out with Liberty German, she was a 14-year-old girl at the time of her death. She was born on December 27th, 2002. At the time of her death, she was 5'4" in terms of her height. For everyone who is not from America, that's 162.5 centimeters, so around a normal height for her age group. She also weighed 200 pounds, which is around 90 kilograms, which is somewhat higher than the average weight for that age group. However, Liberty had a passion for softball, and she actually loved playing the first base position. She was an athlete, so a big part of her weight actually consisted of muscle, I would assume. One thing before we jump into further details about Liberty German, Abigail Williams, being her best friend, she naturally took interest in Liberty's interest in softball, and actually Liberty convinced Abigail to join the school's team for its upcoming season that year. So that's one thing to mention. I've read that Liberty would bake cookies for the family and leave behind sticky notes that offered words of love and encouragement to those she cherished deeply in her life. She also loved painting, doing crafts, and going on vacations. I think many of us could relate to that last part for sure. Apparently, Liberty's parents had addiction issues, and it was decided that Liberty, with her sister Kelsey, would stay with their grandparents, which were Mike Patty and Becky Patty. By the way, Kelsey German, Liberty German's sister, was her older sister. That's also one thing I want to mention here. And in regards to the addiction problems that, Liberty's parents were facing, I don't have all of the information, all of the details on this. I don't think it plays a part in this case in terms of, helping us figure out who the bridge guy is and, who is responsible at the end of the day. So I won't be discussing that in detail. To all of my knowledge, Derek German, Liberty's and Kelsey's biological father, was actually making great strides, and from everything that I've researched, he was doing really good things. He was helping out with his mother's, the girl's grandmother's business. More on that later. So I don't really have anything to add there. I just don't want to leave it people thinking that addiction was a big problem for the family. To all of my knowledge, everything was going swell just before, the girls were murdered. So I just wanted to mention this fact as well, that the family members, even though they had addiction problems back in the day, seemed like they were doing really good, up to the point when the girls actually died. Now, jumping back just a little bit back to Derek himself, Derek German, Liberty's father and Kelsey's biological father, he was actually living in the same house as the two girls, which was the house of Becky Patty and Mike Patty. The family situation of both girls actually is quite difficult to understand, and you definitely need to do a lot of research just to get a grasp on the family dynamics. Now, Kelsey and Liberty have the same set of parents, obviously because they are biological sisters, and those parents are Derek German and Carrie German Timmons. Now, according to my findings, Derek has a third daughter with someone else, and this daughter's name is Glenna Myers. And Carrie, the girl's biological mother, who is not living with them at this point, has two other daughters as well with someone else, and these daughters are Hayden Timmons and Alexis Timmons. Now, Becky Patty, the grandmother of the girls, the biological grandmother of the girls, according to my findings, is Derek's mom, which I'm pretty sure that's the case, and that would actually make Mike Patty Derek's stepfather. Hence the difference in their last names, because Derek German has his last name is German and Mike Patty is Patty. So I'm assuming that Mike Patty is Derek's stepfather, or at least he may not have been raised by Mike Patty, but down the line I'm assuming that Betty Patty sort of split it up with her husband, and she remarried Mike Patty. So I know it gets confusing, but actually, Abigail Williams' family dynamics are even more confusing. Before we get into Abigail Williams' family dynamics, I would like to also mention the fact that Mike and Betty Patty, Liberty's grandparents, seem to be the main spokespersons in regards to the murder of Abigail Williams and Liberty German. And Becky Patty has said to the media that Libby already had her career path pretty much laid out. She wanted to work with the FBI. She wanted to solve crimes. She wanted to help people. She also added that if anybody wants to honor her, please help solve her crime. Now we're jumping to Abigail Williams. So she was 13 years of age at the time of her death. She was born on June 23rd on 2003. She was 5 foot 4 inches tall. So for our international audience, that's 162 centimeters, the same height that Liberty German was at, the time of her death. She weighed 100 pounds, which is 45 kilograms. And when we do the quick math here, you can tell that Abigail Williams was actually half the weight of Liberty German. And Abigail Williams is said to be the more timid, the more shy one of the pair. However, she also enjoyed the sports. She was a math whiz and wanted to be a scientist. According to my findings, Abigail also loved volleyball and had been on the school team for the last 3 years. Abigail often knitted hats for babies at a local hospital. Now, only one source stated, and it really just makes this case a whole more like sad when you think about that such a lovely little girl met her doom the way she had. And we also have some information that she actually enjoyed reading. She loved animals, especially her own cat named Bongo. Abigail's mother is Anna Williams. To my knowledge, she is a single mom who shared a very, very special relationship with her daughter Abigail. Anna Williams has stated to the media that Abby and Libby were only in the 8th grade, but had already talked about pursuing careers in forensic science. So, that's something to think about. Back when I was in 8th grade, I surely didn't know what I was going to do, but apparently the both girls already, had a pretty strong sense to what they actually enjoyed and, what they saw their future like. I will say that it's pretty interesting that Abigail's father is not mentioned anywhere actually. I'm sure investigators know about him, and he most likely does not play a big role in this case, so there is probably no need for him to ever be mentioned. He could have been passed away actually before the Delphi murders even happened. He could have died even before Abigail died. And or maybe some of my listeners may have a better idea of who Abigail's father was. I think there's some information about a special someone who was close to Abigail's mother, Anna Williams. I didn't really look into it that much for this week's episode. Maybe I'll return to this case, but apparently to my knowledge, the biological father of Abigail Williams doesn't really play a big part in this case. Now guys, remember when I said that Liberty German's family dynamics were somewhat confusing? Well, after reading Abigail's obituary, I was left even more confused of Abigail's family dynamics, as the obituary actually lists 3 maternal grandparents, which would be Deanne and Eric Erskine of Delphi and Cliff Williams of Grand Rapids, Michigan. Now, I would assume that Cliff Williams and Deanne Erskine are the biological grandparents of, Abigail Williams, and are the biological parents of Anna Williams, Abigail's mother, and so that would make them the maternal grandparents. Now, while Eric Erskine is mentioned in the obituary as a maternal grandfather, I don't really understand that, because according to my just basic reasoning, I don't think it's possible for a child to have three maternal grandparents, because what is a maternal grandparent? A maternal grandparent is a grandparent from the mother's side. I don't really know how that works. Maybe they were really liberal when they mentioned Eric Erskine in the obituary, because it's a really close knit family, I would assume, and everyone's a grandparent at that point, right? So yeah, at first I thought that Liberty's family tree was a bit confusing, but now it seems so clear actually compared to Abigail's family tree. But I think that's besides the point here. I also want to mention a man named David Erskine, who is Abigail's step uncle. Now, this man is a controversial person in this case, and we'll for sure expect to talk about him in the subsequent episodes. Therefore, I won't focus on him just yet. He's definitely an interesting character that will come up in this series for sure. Before jumping to the actual timeline of events, I want to talk a little bit about the relationship between the victims, Abigail Williams and Liberty German. Abigail and Liberty were two best friends in the 8th grade at Delphi Community Middle School in Delphi, Indiana, which was a small Midwestern town, you could say. It only had around 3,000 residents. It's known for its blue-collared workers, avid hunters and fishers, as well as the annual Delphi Bacon Festival. That's pretty interesting for sure. Both of the girls gravitated towards each other from a very young age because of similar interests and were practically inseparable ever since. Now, like the community around them, they thoroughly enjoyed spending their days experiencing nature by hiking, fishing, camping, and riding ATVs actually, which just sounds like a really, cool activity for the girls to do now. Though the teenagers were keen on spending their days outside, they also found enthusiasm in other curricular activities. Both girls dabbled in music, playing the alto saxophone in the school band. They also relished in creativity by showing an interest in arts, crafts, and painting as well. Before jumping to the timeline, I just want to quickly mention a few facts about Delphi, Indiana. It's actually located only 20 minutes northeast of Lafayette, and it's part of the Lafayette, Indiana Metropolitan Statistical Area. And throughout the series of episodes on this case, we will find out that a lot of people actually worked in Lafayette and are connected to Lafayette, but their estates are actually in Delphi, because Lafayette is a significantly larger city than Delphi. Let's remember that Delphi has only around 3,000 people living in it, and according to my information, Lafayette has around 70,000 people living in it. And now we finally arrive at the basis for episode number 1 on this case, the first part of the Delphi Murders investigation, which is the timeline leading to the girls being reported missing. And on part 2 of the Delphi Murders investigation, I will pick up where I left off, right at the time when police gets involved. So let's begin on Sunday, February 12th on 2017, one day before the murders. Liberty German and Abigail Williams decide to have a sleepover at Liberty's house, knowing that they did not have school the following day. So this was at Liberty German's grandparents' house at Mike and Becky Patty's home. Now, the reason why there was no school on Monday, well, it was because due to snow days being built in the school schedule, but the winter being too mild that year for the snow days to get used. Pretty much in every year's schedule in Delphi, they would have a few snow days just in case the wet, like, oh, it's the first day of snow or something like that, and you get like a day off from school. So these days were not used up this year because the weather was actually pretty warm that winter. And now this is an important factor in this case. Actually, I did some research, and actually on the day when the girls were missing, so not on this day but the following day, on February 13th, actually the temperature, during the period when the girls went missing, was roughly as high as 44 degrees Fahrenheit to as low as 41 degrees Fahrenheit, which would make, in terms of Celsius, that would be as high as 7 plus Celsius to as low as 5 plus Celsius. So for February, Middle America, that's actually pretty warm weather. And I wouldn't be saying this if I would not have checked the previous year's temperature on the same exact day. So actually on 2016, the temperature in Delphi, on February 13th, on the same day, but just, 1 year back, was actually the highest it got in the same day period, from noon to 6 p.m., was actually 18 Fahrenheit, which would be -8 Celsius. So just to put it in perspective for you guys, on 2017, the temperature was 44 degrees. 1 year ago, the temperature was 18 degrees. In Celsius, that would be from 7 plus to -8. So I would say that's a very significant change in weather. And, I think that just sort of emphasizes that actually, it was definitely a very warm winter day. Jumping back to, February 12th, the girls do a typical sleepover. They have typical sleepover activities. And, Liberty's older sister, Kelsey, actually joined them. Kelsey has said that they all had a movie night and ate pizza. Now, Abigail and Liberty stayed up late and they painted a sign that says chocolate, and took videos of each other just being goofy, being silly. I guess typical teenager sleepover activities, nothing out of the ordinary for sure. This leads us to the following day, the day when the girls actually were killed. So that would be Monday, February 13th, 2017. So I will start off the timeline of this day at 10 a.m. in the morning. The girls slept in because they had been up late last night. At around 10 a.m., Liberty's father, Derek, made the girls pancakes for breakfast. Derek left shortly to go take photos for his mother's and, Liberty's grandmother's, Becky's Patty's business. Becky is a real estate agent in Delphi. To my knowledge, she's the owner of MBP Appraisals. So, Derek went to take some pictures, I'm assuming, of some sort of real estate objects that Becky Patty, as a real estate agent, was connected to. Derek went to take those pictures in a town called Frankfort, which is located 24 miles away from Delphi in the northern direction. And when I did a quick Google Maps estimation, Google Maps said that it takes around 30 minutes to get there by car. So to do a round trip, it would take around 1 hour. This will play into this case a little bit. So let's just keep that in mind, that a round trip where Derek was heading at 10 a.m. in the morning, I would assume, or slightly after 10 a.m. in the morning, would take around 1 hour to drive there and to come back. During the morning hours of February 13th, 2017, Liberty's grandmother, Becky, made a deal with the girls. She said if the girls helped her out with filing work for her business, her appraisal business, she would give them some spending money, and maybe later on in the day she would take them out shopping to go spend that money, they just earned. Now, the girls happily obliged, and, they helped Becky with the filing during the early morning hours. I assume this chore took not that long because shortly, the girls made a request. Now, before that, we have to mention that a suspicious vehicle was actually parked at around 12 p.m., just around noon at the abandoned CPS building on the east side of County Road 300 North, next to the Hothier Heartland Highway. Now, you may think, what the hell am I talking about? Well, it's actually the same vehicle that some people believe, and to my knowledge, the police strongly believe that Bridge Guy, it was Bridge Guy's vehicle and that was his escape vehicle. Well, that vehicle close to the entrance of the bridge trail was actually placed there in between the hours of 12 p.m. and 5 p.m. So, police back in 2019 on April 22nd, 3 days after the new direction, the quote-unquote, we're gonna be taking a new direction in this case that the police has sort of announced, 3 days after that press conference, an additional plea was made for help by the law enforcement in identifying the driver of a vehicle left abandoned, in that same place that I just described, between the hours of 12 p.m. and 5 p.m. on the day of the murders. So I just want to mention the fact that, we are talking about how the girls are having their morning activities, they help out with, the grandmother's filing work, they're having fun, Derek had made them breakfast a while, before that filing work. Now in the timeline, we know that that vehicle is already parked at 12 p.m. We're gonna be jumping to 1 p.m., so 1 hour into the timeline. We know that police has told us that, from 12 p.m. that vehicle is parked there in that location. Now at 1 p.m. the girls are still at the house, and this is what they're doing. They actually ask Liberty's grandmother Becky if, they could actually go to the Monon High Bridge Trail, and Becky says yes, but only if they were able to arrange a ride to the place and a ride back home. So, the trail is considered to be a hangout for local teenagers in, the girls' age group. The girls were familiar with the Monon Bridge, with the whole trail, and actually Liberty would often visit the trail with her older sister Kelsey. They would take pictures there. So at first the girls go and ask, Kelsey to drive them to the trail. Now Kelsey agrees after some convincing, because Kelsey stated on her own live stream that, she needed to be convinced to take the girls to the bridge trail, but she told them that she could not drive them back to the house because she had plans to go to a friend's house, which there's a little bit of misconception of who is this friend. I'm assuming it was her boyfriend. My later research led me to believe that it was actually her boyfriend. And after that, she had to go to work. So, she was going to be busy for the remainder of the day. So she could only drive them there, but she could not drive them back. So actually, Liberty then called and asked her dad, Derek German, who was apparently at this point already in Frankfurt taking pictures for, Becky's appraisal business. Liberty asked Derek if he could give them a ride back from the trail since, Kelsey was unavailable. Derek agrees to do so, but he said he would come pick them up as soon as he was done taking photos, in Frankfurt. Derek estimated that he would be done with this photography work in Frankfurt in about 2 hours. As I've said, Frankfurt is 24 miles away from Delphi. It would take around 1 hour to do a round trip. I would say another hour to take those pictures, if you're taking quality pictures. So around 2 hours, which, in the timeline, it definitely makes sense. One thing to mention here is that there was actually no set time for the girls to return to their meeting point. The plan was that Derek would call or text them on his drive when he was close, to arriving to the area, and they would return to the trailhead to be picked up. So the approximate time of when they might expect Derek to come back to pick them up would be around 3 to 3:30 p.m. Now we're gonna jump back a little bit to the suspect's timeline, or allegedly bridge guy's timeline, I would say. So at around 1:26 p.m., a 16-year-old female witness is with a group of friends at the Freedom Bridge, and that's around a half a mile away from where the girls were dropped off, the beginning of the trail. Now, this particular witness said that around 1:30 p.m., she noticed a man and said hello to him. Now, this man gave her a very creepy look, and it scared her like a lot. So this guy is supposed to be bridge guy, according to my information. Actually, the second released sketch, which was, I believe, the first complied sketch. I will be getting into the sketches on future episodes on this case, but to my knowledge, the second released sketch of the man who is cleanly shaved and not the guy in the taxi cab, I think that sketch was actually is the result of this 16-year-old female witness sighting. And police are, to my knowledge, they believe that she saw bridge guy, and it would correlate with the car that was parked at that CPS building location from 12 p.m. to 5 p.m. because actually that building, if you would park your car at that building, the fastest way to get to the Monenhai Bridge, where bridge guy eventually met up with the girls and ordered them down the hill, well, the fastest way is actually going through the Freedom Bridge. And if you look at the map, you can definitely realize what I'm talking about here. So I would say it's definitely not out of the question that the bridge guy may have potentially parked his car at that point in around that CPS building area location, and then walked past at around 1:30 p.m. Walked past Freedom Bridge, and he was sighted by this 16-year-old girl. She also had recollections that this man's height was around 5'6" tall. Later on in the day, she hears about the missing girls, and that's when she actually gives this tip to law enforcement. She also added his appearance. So blue jeans, blue coat, a hoodie, and a short billed hat was what this female witness described the man looking to the law enforcement. One important detail to mention here, she did not mention a GoPro, because if you look at bridge guy's image of him, or the second of him walking on video, he does seem a little bit like he has a GoPro attached to his hat, a little bit, just a little bit. But this witness did not report a GoPro. Well, you could say that if he had a GoPro on him, it's a fringe theory, I know, but if he had a GoPro on him, he could have, put it on later on when he spotted his, prey, his victims, Abigail and Liberty. That's when he put on. I don't think it would make sense for him to wear the GoPro. I'm not even sure where I'm going with this GoPro, but it's just in my notes, and there you go, guys. Now, at around literally the same time, at 1:30 p.m., Kelsey, Liberty's sister, picks up the girls and, drives them to the bridge trail. Now, Phone records indicate that Kelsey's boyfriend actually called her at 1:38 p.m. Kelsey specifically remembers that she had already been on the phone call with him when she dropped off the girls. Now, this would mean that a drop off could not have happened earlier than 1:38 p.m. And this makes sense because, Kelsey remembers that at the same time as she was dropping the girls off at the bridge trail, she was already talking on the phone with her boyfriend. Now the boyfriend calls her at 1:38 p.m. So that would mean, that she couldn't have dropped the girls any earlier than 1:38 p.m. because she was already talking with the boyfriend at that point, because she specifically remembers she started the phone call with the boyfriend before she dropped off the girls, and that phone call started at 1:38 p.m. I know it's confusing. It took me like at least three attempts until I figured it out, but definitely, guys, it makes sense, Let's remember that Kelsey was then on her way to the boyfriend's house, and then she had to work later on the day, so that's why she couldn't drive back to pick up the girls. One thing to mention regarding Kelsey at this point as well is that Kelsey watched the girls walk until they got onto the trail, and she actually did not notice anything unusual at all at the parking area before she drove off, towards the boyfriend's house. At this point, Abigail and Liberty start walking down the trail. The girls walked the trail from their drop-off point toward the opposite end of the bridge. It is approximately 0.4 miles, and if we would convert it to kilometers, it would be 0.66 kilometers. So, it should, in my opinion, that walk, from their drop-off point to the bridge is just around 15 minutes. This will be important, guys, because the suspect seen at the Freedom Bridge should be around the same area where the girls were when they were dropped off. Now, this suspect would have to walk 1.15 kilometers or 0.7 miles if he went straight towards the Man on High Bridge. It should take him around 20 to 30 minutes. So if, he started walking at 1:30 p.m., just around the same time when the 16-year-old female witness, saw him at Freedom Bridge, because, from the Freedom Bridge to the Monon High Bridge, it's around a 20 to 30 minute walk. So actually, he should reach the bridge at around 2 p.m. because if we would, add 30 minutes to 1:30 p.m., that would give us 2 p.m. Now let's jump to the girls' timeline. Now the girls start at the second entrance, where they were dropped off, because I assume the first entrance is where, potentially bridge guy is coming from. So they start off at around 1:45 p.m. Now they need to walk 15 minutes to reach the Monon High Bridge. So they should also, end up there at around 2 p.m. as well. This is very important because this timeline definitely correlates, and, we could gauge that both, the suspect, the person who the 16-year-old witness saw on the Freedom Bridge, and the girls, they're actually ending up at the same place at the same time. At around 2:05 p.m., so 5 minutes after the girls should have reached, Monon High Bridge, Liberty German uploads to Snapchat a picture of, Monon Bridge, and this was the first Snapchat she posted. Now, 2 minutes later, at 2:07 p.m. that afternoon, Liberty posted another Snapchat photo of Abigail walking on the opposite end of the bridge, indicating that the girls have crossed the bridge already. Now, the photo could have been taken before 2:07 p.m., just as the first Snapchat picture of of the bridge itself that was taken, 2 minutes before at 2:05 p.m. Let's remember that these pictures were only posted at these timestamps. They could have been taken before they were posted. So that's just something interesting to think about. My personal opinion is that, teenagers usually take a picture and they immediately post it on Snapchat, or at least within a few minutes. So they probably took the picture and they immediately posted it. That's what I'm assuming, But I will say, after looking multiple videos, on the Monon High Bridge, I will definitely say that you probably need to take at least like 5 minutes to pass it, or maybe like at least 3 minutes if you're used to walking that bridge. So I would actually argue that maybe Liberty posted, maybe Liberty took the picture of the bridge itself before 2:05 p.m., let's say 2 p.m., just around the time when they arrived, and they crossed the bridge. Then Liberty sort of took a picture of Abigail, finishing the bridge also, and then she decides to post a few pictures to Snapchat. Then she sort of posts, one picture, and then 2 minutes later, I'll post this picture of Abigail as well, So I think that could have been the case, that the first Snapchat could have been taken before 2:05 p.m. It could have been taken like 5 minutes earlier. At this point, it doesn't really seem to be widely discussed online. However, I do believe that, getting the correct timestamps is very important for the investigation. If we are to find out who is Bridge Guy, who killed the girls, I think we need to know absolutely everything. And, maybe I just haven't seen the forums or anything like that, but I don't know, guys. I just didn't see the discussion about the correct timestamps here. I think it's actually very important. Both of these Snapchats were posted directly to Liberty's story on Snapchat, meaning that, those pictures were viewable by any of Liberty's added friends on Snapchat. I wonder if we could get the friend list, because currently I don't have that information. I believe that's, some very important information. And actually, I'm surely thinking that, law enforcement has looked into it already, at least in my opinion. Now, this is where things get really dark and creepy. At an unknown time after the two Snapchats were uploaded by Liberty, Liberty starts taking a video on her cell phone. Now, according to how I interpret the situation, the video was filmed somewhere in between 2:15 p.m. and 2:30 p.m. It could have been, completely filmed right there in that time frame. Now, police stated that the girls mostly talked about stuff girls talk about on the video recording, but later the girls mentioned a man. They noticed behind them on the bridge a man walking towards them. So I will say that I just want to step back to the Solvable Mysteries podcast number 76 here, just for a few seconds. We have proposed on that podcast that the suspect may have walked from the other side of the trail past the girls, then turned around, and that's how you would explain how he got so quickly to the girls. Well, this new information that I have uncovered over this week, that the police actually stated that the girls at first were talking about some random girl stuff, then they sort of noticed a man walking towards them along the bridge. I'm fairly certain that it disproves this theory proposed on Solvable Mysteries podcast 76. Just shows that the series on that podcast is definitely just for entertainment and nothing else, I guess. And also on the recording we have the infamous 1 second time period when Liberty was filming and she managed to capture Bridge Guy, the man who we can see for 1 second doing that really wonky walk towards the girls. Now, according to my findings, in the video, the man is around 65 feet away from the girls, which would be around 20 meters away from the girls. So I just want to mention that, he's not close at all at that point, and from the video, it seems that he's not like, within like grabbing distance. He's definitely within running away from a creepy man distance at that point. Sheriff Lozenby, a person who, if you looked into who was, leading the investigation or like talking to the press, you definitely know about good old Sheriff Lozenby. Now, he said that it appeared that the girls initially took pictures for fun, but later became uncomfortable and started recording, the video as a precaution. Now, that's just a crazy thought for me personally. Just imagine those two girls being in that position, knowing that a strange man is approaching them, and just thinking about that situation, you could get like chills down your spine, you know what I mean? In the released video, it is believed that, Liberty's perspective is from the southeastern side of the bridge, looking backwards towards the northwestern side of the bridge. I think that's pretty accurate. I mean, I think this would pretty much mean that the girls have crossed the bridge, and the police believes that they have crossed the bridge and they're filming the man approaching them, from the bridge beginning. So I think that's pretty much common knowledge right now at this point. But I guess it's interesting that we don't know for 100% sure about that fact, but I definitely believe, that happened that way, especially given the fact that soon after that, the man is heard saying, the offender, the bridge guy, is heard saying, "Guys, down the hill." And, right at the bridge ending, there's this really steep hill. And it's really, and, it literally correlates where the bodies were found. So, I thought it was just an interesting fact that, police were still talking about it as if, we weren't 100% sure which perspective the video was taken from, you know what I mean? It has been theorized that, the offender bridge guy had pulled a weapon, such as a knife or a handgun, and found a way to make the girls comply with his orders. And, as I've said, at some point during the video, the offender says to the girls, "Down the hill." By the way, the analysis of the actual video, I'm currently planning it to do that on episode number 2 of this case, so stay tuned, guys, for that. The actual path that the girls and the offender took after, leaving the bridge is actually unknown. I would argue that they went down the steep hill to the right that leads to the Deer Creek, as it was over that same Deer Creek that the girls' bodies were located, over the creek around 50 feet into the shoreline. So I think it's pretty much where they went, because the guy said, "Guys, down the hill," and there's literally a hill, that leads to where the girls died. So yeah. Another interesting fact to mention here is that in between the end of the bridge and the area where the bodies were located, there is actually this shallow section of the creek. This shallow section varies between ankle to knee deep. You can clearly see the shallow section looking at Google Earth. Now, I looked a lot into like Google Earth for the general area, and in my opinion, the shoreline on the other side of the creek where the bodies were found is the best and most secure place for the perpetrator to kill his victims, as it is very secluded and it's pretty easy to get to be honest. The only person you would have to worry about is the property owner, Ron Logan. We obviously don't know whether the killer knew of this man, and or that the place where the bodies were found belonged to Ron, whether he knew that the area was actually private area. Because looking at it, if I was walking in that general area, I wouldn't really even notice that this was like private grounds. It's not like there's no indication that this is private grounds. And I just think it's very important for me to mention right now that I do believe that the place where the girls were found killed is actually, in my opinion, the best place in the whole Delphi area, you know, to commit murders if you're, you know, potentially looking to do that, because the place where the girls were found, it's pretty easy to get to, given the circumstantial situations, because if you're preying upon someone, looking for someone who had already crossed the bridge, because after the Monenhigh Bridge, the bridge trail ends. More on the area and the bridge itself on the second part or maybe the third part of this series. Now, when the bridge, on the end of the bridge, right, you only can easily tell your, you know, potential victims go down the hill. Now, after going down that hill, there is that shallow section of the Deer Creek. After you pass it, you enter the property of Ron Logan. Now, Ron Logan's estate is like, I would say like a half a mile. I don't have the correct numbers at the moment. I will definitely have them in the further episodes when I discuss suspects, but Ron Logan's estate is like quite a bit further away, so you don't really have to worry about him too much. It's not like it's in his backyards. There's a whole like wooded area. It's a big wooded area and it's out of sight. You know, you move 50 feet into the shoreline on the other side of the Deer Creek after you pass that shallow section. That's it. You know, you're in the clear pretty much at that point to do whatever you want, because even if the girls scream, I don't think, you know, at that point, I think they're far away from anyone to really hear them, or at least, you know, someone needs to be like at the end of the bridge as well for them to hear them, because I don't think Ron Logan could hear them from his estate. So that's just interesting to mention that I do believe out of the whole Delphi area is the most, you know, ideal place for a murderer to kill his victims. And I will say this right now, I think that this killing, like this potential area, was definitely pre-planned. Like everything just seems to me that the person who wanted to kill them sort of definitely decided to kill them there. Now, just in advance, I want to mention that there is this big theory that a trucker killed the girls. Now, potentially a trucker would be some random person, you know, just taking a hike during his trucking vacation or whatever, like trucking like routine, doing trucking work. It's a bit of a hole in that theory. If, you know, this was a trucker, you know, he would have had to get really lucky to just stumble across these two girls and then lead them into the most perfect place to kill them, you know, because a trucker would probably not know the area that well. So it sort of seems to me that this was potentially someone who was from the area, or at least knew the area very well. I think the law enforcement would agree with this sentiment as well at this point. Some even theorize that, you know, Ron Logan himself could have something to do with the murders, you know, the property owner, but, you know, he's definitely an interesting character. He had his own problems regarding alcoholism. I'll definitely be getting into him when I do end up talking about the suspect, so I'll just leave it for now. I don't think he was involved, in my personal opinion, as of right now. At this point, Liberty's grandmother, Becky, has said that, you know, call records showed that Derek, Liberty's father, called Liberty at 3:11 p.m., intending to tell them that he was getting close and they should start heading back to get picked up by him. And we also have a point of reference here, because Derek actually remembers that he was just starting to drive over the Wilson Bridge, which is around 1.5 miles away from the entrance to the trail, when he made his 3:11 p.m. call. Now, this call was not answered. No one answered Derek's call. Derek called Liberty, but she didn't pick up. Now, I would argue that the killer couldn't have killed the girls long before 2:30 p.m. because let's remember, you know, Liberty is taking those pictures, or at least publishing those pictures to Snapchat at around 2:07 p.m. I'm thinking the fastest time that the bridge guy could potentially kill the girls would be around 2:30 p.m. and probably that's a stretch as well, because you still have to get through, Deer Creek, through the shallow area that I would assume is a little bit hard to get through, because I've seen helicopter footage from the following day's search of the girls, and the rescuers, they're like really they look like they're having a hard time traversing Deer Creek, and that's only if the killer kills the girls, just like by, I don't know, slashing their throats, doing a really quick kill or something like that, because we don't know how the girls' bodies were found. For all we know, the girls could have been potentially tortured. There are some really crazy theories out there, crazy speculations that, just to say it right now, I looked into them and they seem somewhat credible, like fairly credible, but that's for following episodes in the future. But we don't know how the killer even killed the girl. So where am I getting at with all of this information is, well, if Derek made the first call at 3:11 p.m., and, if we think that the fastest possible time that the killer could have killed the girls at 2:30 p.m., it's still not completely out of the question that the killer hadn't yet killed the girls before 3:11 p.m. What would that mean? That would mean if Liberty's phone had sound on, especially like a ringtone on when the phone is, receiving a phone call, if the phone is ringing, Bridge Guy could have potentially seen her phone, and Derek would probably be named on Liberty's phone as Dad. He could have potentially seen at 3:11 p.m. the phone ringing and the incoming call was from Dad, and that could have made him, just sort of pack it up and rush out. And the girls don't even need to be alive at this point, the phone could just be sort of on the ground, because I'm sort of leaning towards the theory that, I'm not even sure if it's a theory, but that Bridge Guy was aware about the phones, he was just not aware that he was recorded on Liberty's phone, if that makes sense. Jumping back to the timeline at 3:14 p.m, so 3 minutes after the phone call was made to Liberty's phone by Derek, Derek actually pulls into the parking area where I'm assuming he was set to meet the girls. Derek also knew that it was very unusual for Liberty to ignore his phone calls, especially when she was expecting him to call her. Therefore, he parked his vehicle and began to walk the trail in search of the girls. At 3:15 p.m., Derek reaches the point where the trails intersect. Now there are two trails actually in this general location. So there's this one big main trail, spanning across Freedom Bridge, Monon High Bridge, the one that the girls took. It's called the Trail 501. And there is this other trail, 505, that is leading to the shoreline of Deer Creek, but the shoreline is before you reach Monon High Bridge. It's pretty much in between Freedom Bridge and Monon High Bridge. I mean, if you ever looked at, Delphi map, you would definitely know what I'm talking about. So at this intersection where the two trails meet, Derek actually stops a man in a flannel shirt who is approaching the intersection coming from the trail of 501, the main trail where the girls were actually walking. So he was walking from the direction where the girls went in the first place. He's walking towards Derek from the direction of the Monon High Bridge. He's approaching Derek and Derek stops him. Now Derek asks this man in the flannel shirt, "Did you happen to see two girls up there?" And this man replied, "No, I didn't. But there's a couple on the bridge." So I'm assuming by a couple, this man, the flannel shirt guy, as he was later dubbed, and I think he will come up in my investigation again for sure, but FSG flannel shirt guy actually said that, there's a couple on the bridge, but I think he meant a boyfriend-girlfriend type of a situation. He was definitely not referring to Liberty and Abigail, so, just to clarify that. And actually, this man in the flannel shirt later becomes a key witness in this case, and he is among the first to give a witness account to law enforcement, and as I've mentioned before, in online discussions and outlets, he has been nicknamed the flannel shirt guy, or FSG. So whenever I'm actually referring to FSG for short, I'm actually referring to this guy right here. Now, because FSG told Derek that he did not see the girls, in the direction of the Monon High Bridge, on the trail of 501, Derek actually starts walking the other trail that leads directly, to the edge of the Deer Creek, the trail that is in between Freedom Bridge and Monon High Bridge, the trail called 505. You could find it in Google Maps if you really want to, know what I'm talking about here. Now, Derek walks this trail, but he does not see the girls, on this trail. So at around 3:30 p.m., he returns back up to the intersection. He then calls Becky Patty, his mother, and tells her about not being able to contact or find the girls. Derek asks Becky to try and contact the girls as well. Alongside Becky, Liberty's grandmother, Liberty's aunt called Tara was also there, so both of them, Becky and Tara, repeatedly start calling and texting Libby, Liberty German, but they receive no response. Derek at this point, from the trail's intersection, walks down the trail leading to the Freedom Bridge, so in the opposite direction where the girls actually went. The same bridge where, that 16-year-old female witness saw a really suspicious man walking past her, and also the same area where you would have to pass from that, abandoned building where that vehicle was parked, that the police were later inquiring about. So a lot of people think that that's where, Bridge Guy initially came from. More on that in future episodes. Derek, after not seeing the girls on the Freedom Bridge, or, on the trail leading towards the Freedom Bridge, actually turns around and heads back to the intersection, passing FSG again on his way back, which was interesting to me, because I wonder what was FSG doing. Was he just standing around in the intersection? Or maybe Derek was in a rush and had, quickly passed FSG, since he was, to my knowledge, heading also in the same direction that Derek was heading. I'm assuming they were both at that point heading to the direction of the Freedom Bridge. At approximately 4 p.m., Derek returns to his car at the parking area. At this point, Becky and Tara and Derek have been trying to get a hold of Liberty for around 30 minutes with no response. So at this point, worry sat in with the family members. Becky and Tara actually decided to go to the trail themselves to help out Derek to look for the girls. Tara, Liberty's aunt, actually drove straight to the trail, while Becky stayed behind for a little bit, and she made a few phone calls before she also left, in search of the girls. So I believe the first person Becky called was her husband, Libby's grandfather, Mike Patty, who was at work in Lafayette, Indiana, that town that I've mentioned before. And, she alerted him to the situation. Mike then decided to take a day off from work, and he drove to the trail to help in search of the girls. Becky then called Liberty's sister Kelsey and alerted her to the situation as well. Kelsey said that she'll call her work and delay her work shift by a few hours so she could help search for the girls. Now, Kelsey left her boyfriend's house and started driving to the trail. Shortly following that, Tara has also arrived to the parking area, and then actually Derek got into Tara's car, he explained to Tara the details of where, and what he has searched on the trail so far. Tara and Derek briefly waited in the car for Liberty's grandparents, Becky and Mike, to arrive so that they could plan out who would search where, and in that way they could cover more ground essentially. So that's a very smart tactic actually, to not just start panicking and rushing without a plan. And this is where the situation gets a little bit tricky, because Tara and Derek, they were at the same vehicle. Now, reports of Derek talking to Tara in her car were actually used to cast unfounded suspicion towards Derek in online discussions, since Tara is not a well-known person in this case, and it was proposed that she was a stranger. So, the general story was that soon after Derek discovered, or called Becky regarding, the missing children, he was spotted in a unknown vehicle, because they were in Tara's vehicle talking to an unknown person, which was Tara. So that was, unfortunately, when, Derek got accused of pretty much unfounded things at that point. Now, at this point, Becky was about to leave for the trail, and at the same time, Liberty's uncle Cody arrived. Becky told him what was going on, and they drove to the trail together. Now, they theorized, and I am assuming, while driving to the trail, they were theorizing about which path the girls would have taken if they were trying to walk home. And, Becky stated, I'm assuming that they drove the two possible paths the girls could have taken, but did not see the girls, on either of these paths. Just to clarify this little bit of information, so I think they drove past the two possible paths to walk home from the trail, to Becky's home, and not the two possible paths to leave the actual trail. I will talk more about the trail and the general area in the future episodes. A little note regarding Uncle Cody, the man that Becky was with driving to the trail at this point. There are various theories regarding this man and his behavior. Kelsey German has addressed all of these, well, at least some of these theories on her live stream, and I will leave all of this information for the future, but he's also someone I may potentially return in future episodes as well. So, at this point, the family started to contemplate the idea that the girls have somehow gotten hurt on the trail, and from a fall potentially, and Liberty's phone was damaged, and that's the reason why she was not responding. Now, this is very interesting to me, because I wonder whether or not attempts to call Abigail's phone were actually made as well, and if Abigail even had a phone on her. Now, this information is not widely available, and I may address this in future episodes, because I think this is one of the most important details that I currently don't have, unfortunately, whether or not Abigail Williams had a phone on her, and I'm definitely marking this down for future reference, that I need to look into this particular detail for sure. But it would be interesting to know if anyone actually tried to call Abigail as well. Becky and Cody arrived at the parking area shortly, but there were no available parking spots, so they parked in a ditch nearby. It should be noted that there were several non-family vehicles and people at the trail at this time. So at this point we have 6 family members, which is Mike, Becky, Derek, Tara, Cody, and Kelsey. They all meet up and start searching the area for the girls. Kelsey and Cody crossed the Bannon High Bridge and arrived at the southeast end, approximately in the same place where I'm assuming that Liberty German was actually filming Bridge Guy approaching them. They could see down the hill to the private driveway, approximately at the same, they're talking about the same place where, Bridge Guy, to my knowledge, I strongly believe that that's the same place where Bridge Guy, ordered the girls down the hill, pretty much. So, Cody and Kelsey, they could see down that that hill, now before you get to the Deer Creek, right after you get down the hill, there is this private driveway. So they could see the driveway as well. So they actually spend around 20 to 30 minutes yelling the girls' names from there, but they heard no response. And to my knowledge, they did not venture down the actual hill, which is a bit odd to me personally. But then again, it was private land, and they were not assuming that the girls could have been in grave danger at that point. So I guess that makes sense. Because let's just think about it for a few seconds, guys. At this point, the family members are not assuming that the girls are dead. They're assuming that they're definitely lost and something bad had happened to them. But, we're looking at this case from our perspective. We already know what happened, at this point, and we sort of tried, at least personally, I at first projected my own ideas and thoughts that maybe the family members should have called the police a lot sooner, and maybe they at this particular point where Cody and Kelsey were at the end of the bridge and they were looking down the hill, maybe they should definitely have ventured down there. But now when you think about it, at that point, envisioning myself in their position, I would probably not act any different than they did at that point, because you don't know that they're dead. You don't even think that anything bad could happen in Delphi. So I think we sort of have to get ourselves out of this thought pattern where we already know what happened there, and we're questioning people, why are they not calling law enforcement immediately at this point, because they're at this point, I think they're acting very rational, and actually they're being very communicative, and they already have this really in-depth six-man party search force looking for the girls. They're all unified. So I think they're more than rational right now. So from this location where Kelsey and Cody was standing, Kelsey actually called Liberty's phone. She believed that the call went through because she heard it ring on her own phone's speaker. However, Kelsey did not hear it ringing in the area. Kelsey thought that the trail area was quiet enough, and Liberty's phone was, if Liberty's phone was near where she was standing, she would have heard it ringing, but I don't know, is it possible that Liberty's phone was set to silent or, to vibrate, to vibrate? I'm not sure if law enforcement has disclosed this information. Maybe one of my listeners could sort of put me on track here. If you have this information, please contact me some way, or maybe leave it in the comments or something. At some point, Becky actually called her cell phone company, AT&T, and asked if they could ping Libby's phone to locate it, but AT&T said that they could not do that for legal reasons. Becky then asked AT&T about cell phone tracking apps like Find My iPhone or Find My Droid, and which would these apps would allow her to track Liberty's phone. Because of a misunderstanding, Becky actually ended up downloading the app herself, and it actually took a little bit of time for it to become clear that because the phone that Liberty had with her didn't have this app that Becky downloaded, this method would not work and would not provide any help. At around 5 p.m., the time window given by law enforcement for the vehicle of interest left behind off at the old DCS building actually ends. And however, this time window that we have from 12 p.m. to 5 p.m. of that suspicious vehicle that I've mentioned at the beginning of this timeline, it ends in this 5-hour period. But I think law enforcement also stated that this time window should be taken as a very rough and loose estimation. And lastly, at 5:20 p.m., the family call police, and Liberty and Abigail are officially reported missing. And this is where I'm gonna stop the podcast this week, guys. Yeah, I mean, I'm already very tired just going through this timeline. I tried to make, yeah, I covered every single point that I have, and I can now talk in a more relaxed and casual manner. So, just a heads up for, part two of the Delphi Murders investigation. I will sort of continue off into the timeline and it will cover the search. Also, I have a plan to talk about, things that happened after the search, when certain sketches were released, when the audio was released, video, the still footage of Bridge Guy, those types of things. Also have marked down for the next episode to talk about the new direction in this case, the quote-unquote new direction press conference. Also want to talk about what law enforcement is doing right now. I also want to talk a little bit about my own analysis of the released video and audio assets and probably the newest developments in this case. So these are the things as of right now, as of recording this episode, I have marked down for the second part of the investigation, as I will be finishing up the script and just getting all of the points of interest in my little script that I have. I'll see if I can squeeze all of these things into the second part. It could be the case that some of those areas that I've just mentioned will actually fall behind a little bit to part 3. I already have like things mapped down to talk about in part 3 and part 4 actually, so we'll see what happens, guys. I'm really happy that you joined me today. I hope my voice, my really strange foreigner voice didn't I'm really hoping that it didn't scare you guys away. I'm really trying to do my best here, and I'll see you on the next episode. And just chill out, guys, and enjoy yourself, enjoy your life.